There is Bible stories and things that we have in our minds, not by what the text says, but by the image that we have seen. For example, Eve ate an apple. That's what we think. Eve ate an apple, because in the Bible for kids that we read, there was a picture of Eve with a couple of leaves eating an apple. And then you say, oh yes, Eve was eating an apple. Then you have the story of Jonah was eaten by... Come on, you know this one. Let's participate. Jonah was eaten by a whale. And then you realize, because the story, you always have Jonah just launching in the beach, and you have a wee whale putting the water out on the back of the picture. And you're like, yes. And then you say, okay, that's the image that I have. The image that we have on the passage today, that is similar than the image that we are going to have once that we get to the sacrifice of Isaac, is that Ishmael is a tiny wee boy. And you have the picture of Ishmael as a wee boy getting kicked out of the house. And that's not the reality of the story. The reality of the story is that Ishmael is between 16 to 17 years old. And there is a couple of more things that are important. Let's go and focus in the passage. Go back to Genesis chapter 21, and we revisit this passage and think about what is the main point of the story. You have from verse 1 to 7, you have a beautiful picture. Isaac is finally born. Abraham and Sarah have been waiting for this promise. They are now really excited. The day has finally arrived, and you have beautiful Isaac have been born. And then you have the words of Sarah. Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. And she said, who will have said that Abraham and Sarah will nurse a child? Do you know there is the redemption of the laugh? Sarah was scolded because she laughed in incredulity, and now there is a redemption of this laugh, and now she is laughing in joy, from incredulity to joy, from a laugh of being nervous to the laugh of being completed in the Lord. And then you said in verse 8, and the child grew and he was weaned. And Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. And then trouble comes knocking at the door. Because this celebration and this big feast on the day that Isaac was weaned marked something important, marked something that is very key in the story. Because now that Isaac is no longer a baby, but is a child, this is the celebration of him being able to take the inheritance from his father. Now the moment has arrived, and Isaac will be able to take the inheritance. So when we go to verse 9, and I really don't like the translation of the passage, because the passage in verse 9 says, but Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, who he had born to Abraham, laughing. And then you're like, this is laughing. He's just laughing. Who hasn't laughed with a child? Children are the most funny of creatures. They don't have a clue what is going on. They don't have a filter. Have you told to your children to don't say something? And then you say, my mom told me that she is not in the house. Mommy, you just told me that you are not in the house and you don't want to talk with Granny. Children are funny. And then when you have laughing, you will think, it's something like not too much. But then in the notes, in the ESV, you get mockery. And then you're like, this is something slightly more serious. But then if you go to the book of Galatians and you read what Paul is saying about the passage, Paul says that Ishmael persecuted Isaac. And then if you think historically, what is the problem with this? We need to go back a couple of things, and we need to understand the law of the land. Because remember that now, because of the sin that Abraham and Sarah have done, and now that Hagar has, and do you remember that they lied? And so Abimelech gave them land. Now, because of the land that they possess, that was given by Abimelech, they are subjects of the rules of the land. And these are the rules of the land. The wife could not expel and could not kick out any sons of the husband, regardless if they were born in or out of wedlock, regardless if they were born to a free or a slave woman. The wife was unable to kick any of them. And the child, wherever he go to 16, he was considered an adult. This is funny for us to think because times have changed. 40 is the new 16. When I was 12, I had to start working in Cuba. And I always say to the girls when they are complaining about what they don't like for food, I say, when I was your age, and I say I just pretend and I started working early when Amelia is 10. So I had to work for my food. And then you say to your children, I have to do this and have to do that. And then you have a 40 years old playing video games and you are like, when are you going to become an adult? Still have time. 40 is the new 16. 16 years old, Ishmael was a full-fledged adult. He was supposed to get married and start his own nation. But he's not going to start his own nation because he is the heir of Abraham. For 16 years, he has been running that household. For 16 years, all the people that were from Abraham, everybody that does things, know that he is the son of the master. He is the one that is going to inherit everything. And he believes it. And so now, today, at this moment, in the middle of this party, a reality has kicked in. Abraham is celebrating. Abraham is having Isaac as a heir of the promise. And then we think and we may assume that Sarah is exaggerating, that Sarah is overreacting. Sarah, chill. Darling, it's just things between siblings. But Sarah is not overreacting. Sarah is actually trying to protect the promise of God. And Abraham is not having it. Look what the passage says, and as we go, she says to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with the son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be the heir with my son. Listen, the situation is difficult. Daddy is 100 years old. And you have a 17 years old competing for the inheritance against a 3 years old. Doesn't take rocket science to know who is going to win the struggle for power. Isaac needs protection. And as they say, Abraham was very displeased. He was very displeased. He loved Ishmael. And Abraham is trying to have an argument with God, and he is just thinking with human eyes. He is saying, listen, God, I have Ishmael. Ishmael is strong. Ishmael is big. Ishmael can play Pro 1 for all Ireland. He is built like Daniel Porter. He is built solid. I said just play Minecraft. Can we just change? Can we just give the promise to my Ishmael? But if you think about this passage, and if you think about this, that, and if you think about this, you need to focus in this passage in the bigger picture. Because what God promised, God preserved. And as we see just what is happening, he is seeing the whole picture. If you go back to Genesis 3, verse 15 in the Proto-Evangelium, you get the picture of this battle. Then the seed of the woman is going to be battling the seed of the serpent. And as you see the devil fighting, and the devil trying to avoid, and the devil trying to stop the coming of the Messiah, because that is going to be the end of it, you get Cain killing Abel. You get corruption getting to the ground, and by the skin of our teeth, humanity being safe in that ark with Noah. The serpent has changed his strategies, but his final goal is the same. And the promise of God is in danger. This is not a family squabble. This is a divine squabble. This is the battle. A battle for you and a battle for me. And as we encounter this, God says, and this is what you cannot read the Bible, just focus on yourself or just one verse. Because if you read this verse, you will read this. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. And then you can have then an interpretation that, husband, whatever your wife tells you to do, you just do. That's what the Bible says. And then we are in a lot of trouble. Don't worry, boys, I got our backs. That's not what the Bible is saying. Catherine, that's not what the Bible is saying. The Bible is not saying whatever the wife says, you just do. No, in this case, Sarah has the spiritual insight and the heavenly instincts to realize that the promise of God is in danger. Ishmael is a full-fledged man, and Ishmael is ready to take by force his inheritance. And in the beauty of things, and by the law of the land, if the husband gives the slave woman their freedom, in exchange for that freedom, the son will forfeit the inheritance. And then you could say, oh, God is mean and God is bad. But in this case, the providence of God is still going to give grace in lower letters to Ishmael. Because God does not let anybody abandon. And then as Abraham sends Ishmael and Hagar about, you see that in the story, there is a couple of things that will call our attention. He gets the water, he gets a bit of bread, and it's just enough to get to the place that God is going to intercede. And as Hagar is sad, and as Hagar is scared, and as Hagar thinks that this is the end, do you notice that Hagar is claiming both who God's hurt? The voice of the boy. God hears Ishmael. God provides for Ishmael. And God gave a blessing to Ishmael. He is not the son of the promise. He is not the line of Jesus. But God still loves him and will provide for him. But this scare moment, this difficult situation, is something that Abraham and Sarah struggle because everything has a consequence. They thought that they could help God, that they could supply God 16 years previous. We all have things that we made mistakes. Almost 20 years ago, I thought that I was Superman, and I tried to jump from one roof to another. I never made it to the other roof. I just completely destroyed my face. If I look ugly, it's because of that day. So every morning, as I get the Fixodent out and try to push a couple of teeth in, I remember how much of an idiot I was. Almost 20 years ago. There is no day that passed that I just try to relive that day and try to say, I should not have made that jump. The passage today tells to Abraham and Sarah, you should have trust God. You should have trust God. Your child is almost lost. The promise of God was in jeopardy because you didn't trust God. But God in His provision and God in His deliverance is protecting. Because what God promised, He will preserve. And He sees the whole picture. There is something that is very interesting at the end of the passage. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife from him from the land of Egypt. And then you realize that at the end of the passage, even though God has delivered them, God has loved them, God has provided for them, they reject God and go back to Egypt. Sometimes, not sometimes, all the time, the sin in our life is a battle to stop the promise and the deliverance of God. The passage today is not a family squabble. The passage today is a battle between the seed of the woman and the seed of God. And because of the sin of Abraham and Sarah 16 years previous, there is a highly possible chance without the intervention of God that everything could have been ruined. Because without Isaac, there is no Jacob. Without Jacob, there is no David. Without David, there is no Jesus. And without Jesus, there is no us. The passage today, and as Moses is writing, Moses is saying, stop for a minute. Reflect in the truth and realize that our actions has heavenly consequences. But how difficult will be if everything was depending on us? That's why we are pointed to the God that preserves His promise. We are pointing to the God that sees the whole history, to a God that is defeated the seed of the serpent, the God that Ishmael could not overthrow, the God that Saul couldn't surpass, the God that Herod arrived too late to defeat, the God that the cross could not have tied, the God that death could not have defeated. And if you see the word Egypt, and if you see that this word and in Egypt is not today, don't go racist against Egyptians now, not today, but in the Bible and in this passage, Egypt is the place of the seed of the serpent. It's the place where the enemies of God go. It's the place where for 450 years the Israelites were slaves. It's the place where everything could have been finished, defeated, completed. And then you get a promise that says, from Egypt I call my son. And when Herod tried to kill all the kids of Bethlehem, Mary and Joseph escaped to what place? To Egypt. And as the devil is trying to destroy the promise of God in his house, God is preserving his son. The passage today points us to a God that preserves his promise, to a God that protects his children, to a God that will fix my problems, and to a God that even though I am as imperfect as I always have been, will still see the whole picture of my life and preserve me for his glory and for his kingdom forever and ever. And the Church of Christ say, Amen. Many blessings.